Hi there, it's Llarold. And now that patch 8.2 has been on the PTR for a little while, this seems like the right time to start diving into some of the exciting new changes that are coming down the line. The primary feature I'm going to focus on today is the Heart of Azeroth Essence system, which is an unlockable, customizable set of traits that provides you with an active skill and up to 3 passive skills. Let's start by quickly going over how the Essence system actually works. Once patch 8.2 goes out onto live servers, you'll have a questline to do with Magni. A questline that isn't actually on the PTR yet, or I'd be showing it right now. Once you finish that questline, Magni unlocks new powers in your Heart of Azeroth, and you can start leveling it past level 50 up to the new cap of 70. You'll also gain access to the Heart Forge, where you can socket in newly unlocked Heart of Azeroth powers. I'll go over how you unlock those in a second, but first, here's some great news. This system works almost exactly like talents. You can change traits anywhere in the world as long as you use a tome or are in a rest zone. Your traits are chosen on the neck on a spec-by-spec basis, and don't have to be changed out when you change pieces of gear. And unlike Azerite armor, there is no respec cost. So really, even though this is the continuing evolution of the Azerite system, it works much more like a level 120 only talent tree. And that's great. I'm really glad to see Blizzard learning from the mistakes they made early on in the expansion and making a point to create this new system in a way that's convenient, inexpensive, and, best of all, not super annoying. So now let's get into how the essences work and how you acquire them. Every essence has 2 powers, a major power and a minor power. Most of the major powers are active skills, although a few of them are passive, such as the Cheat Death essence for tanks. Sometimes the major and minor powers directly interact with each other. For example, a minor power that gives you a stat proc, and a major power that deals damage and forces the minor power to proc on demand. Sometimes they don't interact at all, and don't even really seem related. At first, you'll be able to use only one essence, which grants you both its major power and its minor power. As you level up your Heart of Azeroth necklace, you'll be able to use up to 2 more essences' minor powers as well. So like I said at the start of this video, this pretty much gives you access to 1 active skill and 3 passives. Every essence has 3 ranks, and unlocking each rank requires you to do increasingly difficult or more time-consuming things to unlock them. That being said, they are all supposed to be pretty easy to get. Even better, they're all deterministic, meaning there isn't any random chance. A lot of the essence rank unlocks come from achievements or reputation vendors. But for the ones that drop from dungeons or raid bosses, you'll get it the first time you kill that boss. No bad luck to deal with there. As for how the ranks work, it's pretty intuitive. The Crucible of Flame seems like the first and most basic essence that everyone will unlock, so let's use it as our sample case. At rank 1, the major power gives you a fireball that you can shoot at enemies to damage them, or allies to heal them. It's on a 30-second cooldown, and the amount of damage or healing it does doubles every time you cast it, resetting after the 3rd cast. The minor power gives you a procced crit buff. Overall, this power is pretty basic and kinda lame. At rank 2, using the major power forces the minor power to proc for 5 seconds, and the minor power also grants a 10% damage and healing increase as a short hot or dot. Much better. At rank 3, the major power gains a second charge, and the minor power grants a very small amount of leech. Again, another significant upgrade from where it was at rank 2. There's also a 4th and final rank for every essence that conveys a unique appearance for that essence's powers. What do they look like? Who knows? They're not on the PTR yet, but the unlock requirements are, and some of them are pretty rough. Unlike the other ranks, these ones are not deterministic, and they come from all kinds of sources. Reaching max level on your Heart of Azeroth neck, completing Keystone Master, Paragon Reputation crates, PvP bounty kills in the 2 new zones, and so on. Hopefully these new appearances are appropriately awesome for the amount of work that's going to be required to unlock them. But it should at least give us something cool to work toward throughout the rest of the expansion across our mains and our alts. Now let's move on to the fun part, and break down each essence one at a time based on how they'll appeal to tanks. There are 11 essences available to tanks at this time, and while some of their tuning is still probably subject to change, the core effects themselves more than likely will not change much, if at all, between now and when this system makes its way onto live servers. Going alphabetically, let's start with Aegis of the Deep, my absolute least favorite essence. The major power is a very simple defensive cooldown. Reducing your damage taken from each hit by a flat amount of damage is not bad in AoE, but it's almost totally worthless in single target unless it's massively overtuned. Because the healing that this trait provides is tied to taking damage, it's effectively just more damage reduction that could potentially overheal. If it's tuned correctly, this power could be a useful defensive cooldown for pulling really large packs in Mythic Plus. Unfortunately, the tuning is just way too low at this point to really be of any serious value.
Even worse, this power is, at least at this point on the PTR, on the global cooldown, which is just terrible for defensive skills.
The minor power's not too bad. It's not amazing, but 500 versatility and 1500 healing per second when tanking in AoE is okay. Again, I don't like this trait, but I do appreciate that it's consistent. Still, I think it would be boring even if it were tuned high enough to be good, and it's definitely not at that point right now. This essence is mediocre to bad for Mythic Plus, and very bad for raids. Anima of Life and Death is another Mythic Plus oriented essence, but it's much more interesting than Aegis of the Deep. It provides a big, on-use AoE damage cooldown that consumes 10% of your max health to deal the same amount of damage to all nearby enemies, and heals you for that much health for each enemy you hit, up to 50% of your max health. The amount of damage this power can do will obviously vary based on the class you're playing and the amount of mobs you've gathered up and just how much stamina you have on your gear, but it's got the potential to be a very solid all-around option for all 6 tanks in Mythic Plus.
The minor power is a stacking health buff. There's never anything wrong with having more health as a tank, and it does synergize somewhat with the major power.
I don't think this is a minor power you're probably going to want to take on its own most of the time, but there may be some scenarios in raids where you need a tiny bit more health to survive a big boss hit, and this could help. Overall, this essence is great. Moving on. Azeroth's Undying gift is a basic defensive cooldown. It's not bad, but it's not particularly good either. Blood DKs will recognize it as being a worse version of Rune Tap. As I said, there's nothing bad about having access to another defensive cooldown, and this fits that bill. That being said, this is going to be a situational option for raids at best. The minor power, on the other hand, is an incredible option for Mythic Plus tanking. A ginormous armor proc is exactly what the doctor ordered for staying alive when tanking huge, teeming packs of fortified bolstered adds. So this is a situationally decent major power for raids, plus an outstanding minor power for Mythic Plus. This trait is probably the perfect example of how cool this system can be. Also notably, the major power is off the global cooldown, as all defensive cooldowns should be. Next up is the Engine of Ceaseless Progress, which is complicated. I've read the tooltip about 150 times now, and I'm finally starting to understand how it works. The minor power randomly grants you stacks of Mastery, Haste, or Crit buffs every 2 seconds. When it hits 10 stacks of any of those 3 buffs, all of your buffs double for 8 seconds, then reset to 0. This trait is the big boy version of Elemental Whirl. It could be good, but probably not as good as any other options. It's a real shame that it doesn't give versatility since all tanks like verse. Oh well. The major power doubles all of your current stack counts, and puts a small circle on the ground for 10 seconds that grants you a charge every half second, and 10% reduced damage taken for as long as you stay in the circle. This essence does way too much for a moderate secondary stat gain, and having to stand within a really small circle to benefit from the major power is lame. This trait will be bad for Mythic Plus. It could be good for raid fights in which you don't have to move much, but I imagine there will always be better options. Overall, I'm just not that big of a fan. Memory of Lucid Dreams is the first of 2 essences that have different effects for every spec. Granting a massive amount of increased resource generation has the potential to be a really nice cooldown for some specs, and probably pretty good for healers. But for most tanks, it probably won't be worth taking over other alternatives. Then you have Brewmaster Monk and Vengeance Demon Hunter, where increasing your energy and pain generation wouldn't even be useful. Not great. The minor power is pretty appealing for Protection Warrior, since any increased rage generation will contribute to the positive feedback loop between anger management and booming voice. And the healing and versatility procs are nice too, I guess. Other than that, this trait probably won't be useful for any of the other 5 tank specs. I wish Blizzard had come up with a more interesting idea for tanks than just giving back resource, since it's a pretty fun idea for a lot of DPS specs and pretty uninteresting for tanks. But they didn't. Oh well. Nullification Dynamo's major power provides a huge magic shield, and weirdly a complete magic, poison, disease, curse dispel. Blood DKs might recognize this as being a weird version of Anti-Magic Shell. The cooldown on it is very long, and even worse, it's on the global cooldown. As a result, I don't think this major power is going to be useful at all. It operates in a very similar space to Azeroth's Undying Gift, except it only applies to magic damage. As I said before, it's on the GCD, and the cooldown is over 3 times as long. That's just not great. The minor power, however, totally rules. At my current mythic BOD item level of 418, it provides around 2300 magic damage absorption per second, and if every shield is fully absorbed, it also provides 2300 DPS. That DPS is equally split among all targets it hits, so it's clearly a better option for single target DPS than it is AoE, and that's okay. The rest of the trait is definitely tuned more towards single target than AoE tanking as well. Overall, I would say this has the potential to be a very nice defensive minor trait for raid tanking, and possibly a decent option for some mythic dungeons, depending on which dungeon you're running and what the affixes are for that week. Next up is a real surprising favorite, Sphere of Suppression. Now the major power is an AoE slow that grants damage reduction and movement speed. This could be useful for kiting in Mythic Plus, but since the essence is obtained through PvP, it's pretty clear that this is a PvP focused option. No worries, let's move on to the minor power. And wow. The minor power provides 8% reduced attack speed for any enemies who hit you, a haste buff, and 15% increased auto attack speed. 8% reduced enemy attack speed is effectively equal to 8% reduced physical damage taken from armor, which would be worth way more than 3 ranks in Gem Hide. Even better, 8% reduced enemy attack speed means that on-hit effects trigger 8% less often. So raid bosses like Mechatork, who don't really do a ton of damage with their auto attacks but trigger a spell damage effect when they auto attack, will still wind up doing 8% less tank damage overall. Necrotic stacks will apply 8% slower. But wait, there's more! The haste is nice, and the 15% increased attack speed is also extremely strong for specs with on-hit effects, such as Blood DK proccing Crimson Scourge and Bloody Runeblade, Protection Warriors using Devastator to maximize their single target DPS, and Bear Druids generating rage with auto attacks. Sorry, Druids. And now for some bad news. This essence comes from PvP, Battlegrounds to be specific. Since this is pretty much the most incredible defensive power that's ever been given to tanks in the history of WoW, and at this point it does work against enemies in dungeons and in raids, there are really only 2 possible outcomes I can foresee happening. First, Blizzard could nerf it into being completely useless, or just simply make it not work in PvE content. Either of those would be a real bummer. They could also decide to let it keep working, which means you need to go get it by doing Battlegrounds. BGs are not my favorite. Congratulations to you if you enjoy them, but for me, yikes.
Now it's funny how this always works out, but as I was finishing up this video, Blizzard put out a new build that includes a small nerf to the Sphere of Suppression minor power. The only changes are a reduction of the auto attack speed increase from 15% down to 8%, which makes it equal to the auto attack slow it provides. That's a good thing for a couple of reasons. First, this means that since we're a few builds into the PTR now, and this is all that Blizzard has done to Sphere of Suppression, it's probably going to be a useful staple tank trait. So, yeah, looks like PvP's back on the menu, tanks. Also, for specs like Brewmaster that don't really care much about the auto attack speed increase, and for players who don't really like doing Battlegrounds, that particular part of the power comes from rank 3 of this essence, which presumably requires a lot more time spent in BGs than the first 2 ranks. There's still no reason not to go get rank 3, ultimately, but maybe it's a little less urgent to slog through BGs now than it would have been prior to this nerf. I already used this power as my example earlier, but here's the quick recap in case you've forgotten in the ensuing 10 minutes. You toss out a ball of fire that does damage or healing, it doubles in value each time you cast it, resetting after the 3rd cast. Throwing out the fireball triggers the minor power, and if it's already active, it adds to the existing duration, which is good.
The passive trait's a small crit and leech proc, and neither of those is really competitive with other traits at all. The proc also grants you 10% extra damage and healing as a short dot/hot. Because the proc rate is currently 1.25 ppm, this translates to about a 2% total DPS increase, which really isn't that great. The added uptime from the major power can get it up to more like a 3.75% damage increase, which is a lot better, but we'll just have to see. I'd say this one is entirely dependent on tuning, but it's somewhere in the ballpark of not good at all to very good. I realize that's not specific. Sorry. And here we have Touch of the Everlasting. Remember how I said Aegis of the Deep was my least favorite essence? Yeah, I just remembered it's this one instead. Cheat death effects are traps. Sure, you could use a cheat death and hope you don't need it, or you could just use a more powerful option that prevents you from needing the cheat death in the first place. The positives, I guess, are that it is there if you need it, and that it accounts for one of the biggest problems with most cheat death effects by giving you a humongous defensive cooldown when it triggers, making it so that you probably won't just die immediately after proccing it. That's good, I guess. It is still bad, though. The minor power is a decent versatility buff that gets cut in half if you die. This makes it a clear step down from Aegis of the Deep's minor power in Mythic Plus, but I still wanted to know how the debuff you get for dying works, so I killed myself a few times to test it out. It doesn't prevent you from changing essences, but it will persist through swapping them in and out. I went to Bastion of Twilight and killed myself while fighting a raid boss by pulling Halphus Wormbreaker and jumping off the platform into the lava below. Wiping to a raid boss did clear the debuff, making this power usable for raid progression. Is it great? No, not really, but it's 543 versatility that's useful even in single target. So, that's something. Vision of Perfection is the other spec-specific essence, and it ranges anywhere from totally worthless to one of the greatest increases to player power in the history of the game. The major power is a passive, and it grants a chance for all of your skills to trigger a major cooldown for 35% of its base duration. Yeah, the tooltip does still say base cooldown. It's a weird typo that's persisted through a few builds on the PTR now, but there you go. Anyhow, in the case of Warrior and Paladin, this essence is awesome. Truly awesome, definitely the best possible option in pretty much every scenario. You can trigger Avatar or Avenging Wrath, which adds to their duration if already active, reduces their remaining cooldown, and will trigger Azerite effects such as Bastion of Might or Avenger's Might. One weird quirk is that if the cooldown is already active and Vision of Perfection triggers and adds to its duration, then those Azerite traits like Bastion of Might and Avenger's Might will not increase in duration to compensate. But if you get a fresh proc of Avatar or Avenging Wrath, they will. There's really not anything you can do about it, and the power is still amazing even with this bug, but now you know. The minor power reduces the corresponding skill's base cooldown by 15%, grants a very small amount of passive versatility, and causes you to heal for 5% of max health whenever you use the skill or Vision of Perfection procs. It's nice, but not a huge deal on its own. Again, this essence is the absolute best for Protection Warrior and Paladin in virtually every scenario. As for the other 4 tank classes, it sucks. It provides Vampiric Blood for DK, Metamorphosis for DH, Survival Instincts for Druid, and Fortifying Brew for Brewmaster. And just like every other spec, the procs last for 35% of the duration of the base skill. This means that for Druids, the Survival Instincts proc is 2 seconds long. 2 American seconds. Can it proc while you're not even tanking? Yes. Can it proc when you're tanking and the boss turns around to zap a raider with a spell? Of course. Is this some kind of out-of-season April Fool's joke? No. As the Brewmaster Theory Crafter Immalson has pointed out, if you're a druid using the Sphere of Suppression passive, tanking a boss with a base attack speed of 2 seconds, and you get a Survival Instincts proc, you could have the proc occur after the boss is auto-attacked, fall off before the boss's next auto attack, and get 0 benefit from it while still actively tanking the boss. It's bad. Now, despite all the negativity it sounds like I'm putting out here, I actually don't want to take this bonus away from Prot Warriors and Pallies, not to mention all of the DPS specs that like it, because it is extremely fun and awesome for them. The problem is that, obviously for the other 4 tanks, it's a humongous bummer. Blizzard has already made a pass at balancing this essence, so I would expect that this is close to their final version. Basically, if you thought Prot Warriors and Pallies were destroying the damage meters and leaving Brewmasters, Blood DKs, and Bear Druids in the dust before, well...
If I had the power to try and balance out this essence, I think what I would really want is just for those tank specs whose DPS is languishing way behind the top performers to be brought up to par.
The reason that Blood DK, Bear Druid, and Monk are falling so far behind is that they don't really have offensive cooldowns, which is the whole reason this trait's so bad for them. I think it's totally unrealistic to expect Blizzard to suddenly give them offensive cooldowns in the middle of an expansion, but they could tune their baseline DPS up a good bit. That's basically all they would need. And finally we have World Vein Boon. World Vein Boon is a supercharged version of the Azerite trait Earthlink, a very lame Azerite trait. No surprise, this essence is pretty lame too. The minor power periodically causes Azerite shards to spawn near you and grant you a modest amount of primary stat and healing over time for as long as you stand nearby. The major power forces 3 Azerite shards to spawn near you immediately. Fortunately, this essence is simple and easy to understand. Unfortunately, it's pretty bad. Standing in a small area to gain a buff is usually not a great bargain for tanks, and this is no exception. The healing is mediocre, and the primary stat is similarly underwhelming. Not very good. Well, I think that about covers it. If you have any questions about the Essence system, or any of the traits, ask away. With the PTR starting to get rolling, patch 8.2 isn't that far off. We're really excited to preview some of the fun new systems and content, and if you have any ideas, we'd love to hear them. Stay tuned for more, and as always, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Bye.